I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I hate about fitness is that it has a lot to do with discipline. I'm going to be entirely honest, it doesn't have much to do with discipline at all. Realistically, for me, I go in, I train 3 times a week, I enjoy it. There's no discipline involved. I show up because I'm having fun. I show up because I am continuing to train for goals that I have been working towards for years, and it would seem silly not to keep doing that. And quite honestly, it would take a lot of discipline for me to just not go to the gym. I'm gonna be entirely honest. I've been going to the gym for so long, for over 15 years of my life, that if you were to say, hey, you have to not go to the gym for like 2 months, I would probably go a little bit insane. That just is what it is. There's no discipline involved. It would be discipline to try and not do this. And so the question is, okay, what makes me different from another person who hates working out and just doesn't want to do it and, would have to require a lot of discipline to actually get to the gym? The reality is that discipline is sort of about, forcing yourself to follow particular, patterns of behavior that you don't enjoy. At the end of the day, I think that's what most people are talking about when they're talking about discipline. It's like, hey, I don't enjoy doing this thing, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I am disciplined, right? And what I find is that very often you could say the same thing about virtually anything that is difficult that people do, right? So a really great example is that I used to work for a gym that opened at around 5:30 in the morning. I had to be there every single day to open the gym. If I wasn't, then, my boss would get mad at me and, I would get fired and so on. And so in order to be there, to open up the gym so early, I had to wake up at often around 4 a.m. I had to wake up about an hour earlier so I could, get dressed, get changed, have breakfast, hop in the car, drive to work and so on. So I could be there in time to get everything opened. Amusingly, I was often not the first person there. There were sometimes, there was this little old lady who loved working out first thing in the morning, and she would often show up 10, 15 minutes ahead of time. And so if you got there a little early, she'd be so happy, because she'd be like, awesome, I can get my workout done a little faster. And she'd, help you open up the building. She'd come in and be like, all right, I'm gonna, push all the power switches for you. Okay, great, thanks. That's the kind of gym it was. And I have to say, that is, to this day, one of the most difficult, getting up for a job periods that I've ever had, because I've never been a morning person. I've always been a bit of a night owl. Very often in those days, my sleep was so messed up that I would sleep from about midnight to 4 a.m., wake up, go to work, come home, sleep for 2, 3, 4 hours. And that was basically my sleep schedule at the time. Was I was sleeping twice a day for about half as long as you normally sleep. You could have said, hey, that requires so much discipline. But it didn't. It had one simple thing, which is that I relied on that job to be alive. I needed that money. I needed that income. If I did not need to get out of bed at 4 a.m., I wouldn't have done it. It would have taken a lot of discipline for me to get up at 4 a.m. But because I had that job, because I had that reason to wake up, because I had that extremely powerful external stimulus saying hey, if you don't do this, it's gonna ruin your life, I did it every single time, right? I got used to it. I made it a habit. And because of that, it became more and more natural over time until it became, second nature to me. Okay, wake up at 4 a.m., fine, no problem, whatever, right? None of that was about discipline. That was about having powerful external motivators that kept me going. And realistically, when you look at people who tend to be extremely in shape, people who tend to be, extremely up on their fitness, you tend to see the same sort of stuff. It's not actually about having discipline. It's very often about the fact that these people have external motivators that keep them going. A really classic example is someone who's a natural athlete, right? You start off, you're young, try sports, you get rewarded because it turns out you're really good at it, you have some natural talent. This ends up with you getting put on, say a sports team, right? You develop connections, you develop friendships on that sports team. You begin to derive a significant amount of your self-worth from being embedded as a part of that team. And then, if your genetics are really good, if you're particularly gifted, that might lead into, okay, you do really good at the high school level. Now let's see how you do at the university level. Now let's see how you do it at a national level. Now let's see how you do it at an international level, right? As you get higher and higher up, you get more and more, praise, rewards, potentially money, definitely a lot in terms of just social belonging And those are all powerful external motivators that keep you going. Conversely, when you look at people who are often failing with the gym habit, often the problem is that they have no external motivators whatsoever. There's no real reason they have to get in shape. There's nothing forcing them to do it, and they don't have any social support along the way. Very often people are trying to go it alone. So what that means is they're like, hey, I should work out, I should get in shape, and they're trying to do it all by themselves, and there's no reward system, there's no external stimulus, there's nothing that's encouraging them to do this. They're not, doing this in conjunction with family members or friends. They're not doing this as part of some social group. There's no monetary reward on the line, nothing. And so they end up failing because they experience a few difficulties. It's tough. They end up having, potentially negative early experiences that compound into more negative experiences. And the end result is that they give up. And that's a pretty common situation for a lot of people. Conversely, you look at the people who tend to succeed, they tend to be the kind of people who are very good at finding support, finding social motivators, finding other reasons to keep them moving. In particular, when I started out doing fitness, basically I'd spent my entire life hating it, right? I had tried things where it was like, okay, gonna try running, realized that I wasn't particularly good at it, tried out for the track and field team, never particularly good at it. Sure, I had a little bit of social motivation in terms of, just a few friends who were there at the time, but never really stuck for me, never really clicked for me. Really, the big shift happened for me when I was struggling with depression and anxiety issues. I went to my therapist. I was suggested that, hey, I should try and get more active. At the time, all I had known was running. I had tried it, didn't like it, nothing going on there. So I figured, okay, I'm going to try out lifting because I've not tried that before. And at the time, I had some very powerful social support. So of course, there was my therapist who was encouraging me to do this. There was my father. My father was having issues with his blood pressure around that time, so he was getting a lot more active. He was starting to go to the local gym, the local YMCA, a few times a week, and so that made it very easy for me to get to the gym. He'd just be like, hey, do you want to come along with me to the gym? And I'd say, sure. And we'd go together, work out at the same time, and then leave, right? So I already had a parent who was very supportive, and then at the same time, I also had a friend who was super into lifting, who thought it was super cool, who was really encouraging me as well. And because of that, I was like, okay, I've got this friend, we're bouncing off of each other. We're really excited about seeing a little bit of a tricep or being able to, move a little bit more on the bench press or whatever. And I would say that those were three crucial factors in me really obviously establishing this habit. And of course, I connected this with my recovery from my depression and anxiety issues, so it became a no-brainer for me. I had all these powerful reasons to continue training. And so of course, there was no discipline involved. I just kept doing all of this because I enjoyed doing it, and I had all these powerful motivators behind me. And then of course, over time, I got to the point where I just enjoyed it for its own sake. I got to the point where I was doing fitness as a career. And obviously now I have a massive amount of other support behind that in terms of this is my career, this is how I make my money, and so of course I've got to keep doing it. I was recently thinking about how I've gotten to the point where fitness is not really necessarily something I would even think of as a major hobby for me. Realistically, fitness is something that takes up about 5 hours dedicated time out of my week. I don't spend a lot of extra time worrying about it. I used to do that. When I was starting out, it would be constantly, I would have thought, okay, this is my only hobby. All I care about is lifting. I'm spending X amount of hours in the gym. I'm spending, X amount of hours reading up on how to be better in the gym. And, at the end of the day, I got to a point where I have enough expertise, I have enough knowledge, I have enough experience that I don't have to do any of that anymore, right? And I've managed to find a way where I can cut down to a minimalist level of training, where I can continue to see amazing results, even after, again, 15 plus years of lifting, without having to spend as much time in the gym. And so it's well, why would I want to? Why would I spend a lot of time in the gym training for stuff that I don't need to do? And so for me, fitness is not even really a hobby anymore. It's not even really something that I do as a hobby. It's just sort of a natural part of my daily routine. There's no discipline involved. It's just a natural thing for me. It would be discipline if I was to try and force myself not to do this. These patterns are so ingrained that they're going to be with me for the rest of my life. And this is, in many ways, what happens, I guess, when you win at fitness. You've done it, right? When you get to that point where you have a perfect balance, you're putting in the right amount of effort to see results, you're not overdoing it, you're not overthinking it, you're moving on, having more hours to spend on the rest of your life, having more hours to spend on the things that matter to you, having more hours to spend on other pursuits, that obviously means that, it's like, okay, great. Like, you don't need to do any more than that. Certainly there are times in any pursuit where you're going to have difficulty, and certainly in those points, discipline or, some level of stick-to-itiveness, whatever you want to call it, can come in handy, right? It can help you overcome those initial hurdles. But I would say that this is kind of a small factor in the overall picture. The overall picture is, do you have enough support? Do you have enough external motivators pushing you in the right direction? Do you have the right level of knowledge, the right level of expertise, the right level of experience? If you have those things, it's going to be way easier. It's going to be natural. It's going to be second nature. If you don't have those things, it's going to feel like an uphill battle. It's going to feel like everything is awful. And of course, that's going to require some discipline. But that's because what you're doing is you're trying to use the wrong tool for the job. If you're talking about, say, a nail, and you're like, hey, you're going to try and drive it in with a screwdriver, that's going to be tough. If you have a nail and you drive it in with a hammer, it's going to be easy. Saying that fitness is about discipline is like trying to drive a nail with a screwdriver. You can do it. It's not the optimal way to do it. Shouldn't be the main way that you try and do it. That is all for this week's video. As always, I hope you have enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to comment down below. Let me know what you would like to see in future videos. I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.